Hi, True Avatars, and welcome back to your Queer Video Game Podcast. This is episode 11, and I am your host, Zoe Wild, transgender and bisexual as ever. My pronouns are she, her. This week, I am joined by a special guest who is also named Zoe. Zoe is a transgender woman, her pronouns are she, her, and she works in the games industry in Montreal, Canada. Hi, Zoe.
Hi, hello. Yeah, there's a lot of Zoes in our community.
There really are. I didn't even know when I picked my name that I would be
No,
picking
me
a
neither.
name that everyone else chose.
Yeah, no, I was just like, oh, Zoe's cute, and then I found out it's like one of like the 5 names that I'm pretty sure cover like half of trans women.
Yeah, up there with Lily, I think.
Yeah, no, my bestie's name is Lily. Sophie, yeah, that's a big one.
That's a big one. Too, yeah.
Lots of Emilys.
Yeah.
I
Honestly,
know more
if it's a generic white girl name, I feel like we've taken them all.
Oh, Sarah as well. There's a lot of Sarahs. I don't know any Sarahs, but I know that they're out there.
So, this week, as usual, we'll break the ice with games we've been playing, cover the latest headlines, and last but not least, our segment, an interview with Zoe and her experience as a game dev. So, let's just break the ice, Zoe. What have you been playing lately?
So I am like big into like retro games. I have a handheld that I keep in my purse that kind of I have like everything on. Like I've got a couple thousand games on it. Recently I started playing Marvel Ultimate Alliance. No, I'm lying. I started playing X-Men Legends, which is a completely different game, but it's like the same thing. So I started playing that recently, which was really cool. I found this like really neat Game Boy Advance like a very traditional like first person RPG called Mazes of Fate. And I really have a soft spot for like games that are way too ambitious for their target platform. So this is like a like first person Western RPG with like, you know, like the grid-based first-person dungeon crawling, and it has like super like in-depth character customization and a huge world, and the story's good and the art's good, and I'm just kind of like, how have I never heard of this? This is like a Game Boy Advance game, and it's like an insanely big, ambitious RPG. And it's like original. It's not like a port of something else. So I've been kind of impressed with that. I always like booting up a game that's like, yeah, just like, oh wow, how did they make this?
What have you been playing it on? You mentioned a handheld in your purse.
Yeah, on a Retroid, I have a Retroid Pocket 4 Pro, which is like an emulation device. It's Android based, and I have it. Yeah, I just have like a shit zillion games on it, and it'll play everything up to like PS2, GameCube, pretty good. Like, there's a couple PS2 games that you're probably not going to get full speed, but otherwise it's like perfect at like a 2x upres. And then yeah, I like having it. I'll die if I don't have thousands of games on me at all times.
That's understandable. Most of
Like
us feel that way.
I'll just turn into a skeleton and collapse.
I have to keep my backlog with me at all times, or I like go into cardiac arrest.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something I am playing, but I'm very, very excited to play the new Indiana Jones game. I think that might end up being like the new Alien Isolation, where it's like a licensed game of a beloved IP that's like too good to exist. It looks like, I remember when the gameplay presentation of that was coming out, and I'm a little cynical, so I'm like, oh, it's like a AAA licensed game. When's the live service games as a service bullshit gonna come in? And it just didn't. Like, the entire video, I'm like, okay, where's the catch? Where's the catch? And it's like, no, this just looks like a really, really good game.
Yeah, and I thought too, like, even if it was a perfect game and like really good, I was like, there's no way they're either not gonna get Harrison Ford's likeness, or they're not gonna be able to like get someone who sounds like Harrison Ford if they can't afford Harrison Ford himself. And
he's doing such a good job.
Yeah,
that's Troy Baker, right? Like,
I think so. Yeah, Troy Baker.
Oh my god, he's doing an amazing job. Like, he sounds just like him.
Yeah, I'm really excited to play it, but I'm like torn now because I have an Xbox Series S, and I'm like, it's a big game. Like, it's apparently 113 gigabytes to download, and I can fit that on my Xbox Series S, no problem. But yeah, I'm worried about performance because I think it's pretty demanding, and I think I'd rather wait for the PS5 version.
I have Game Pass, so, and I don't have a PS5, so I'm gonna play it. I'm sure it'll be fine. I'm not the most performance obsessed person. Like, I you know, grew up playing janky ass like Eurojank RPGs and shit. So like, I'm kind of okay with something not perfectly performing, although it does look really pretty. So I hope it looks good. I'm sure it'll work fine. I know like Xbox's certification won't let your game launch if it's busted.
True, but even Nintendo has a similar process for that, and they still release their own first-party games with like significant frame drops. We're just at a point where now games are just like, we're going to talk about this a bit in the news later, but games are just getting so bloated performance wise, where they're just trying to like constantly like one up each other and like make things
Yeah,
look so good.
it's too bad because like I still think the best looking game of all time is a PS2 game.
Which game?
Okami,
Oh,
aka
I
my
think you're
favorite.
right.
Yeah, my favorite Zelda game, Okami.
That's fair. I have the Switch version. I haven't started playing it yet, but I did pick it up because I was like, this feels like a big gap in my gaming experience that I haven't played this. So
It's so good. It's so good. Uh the part 3 of the final boss music was my ringtone for like a decade. That game, it just makes me happy. That's like happiness in game form. It's beautiful, it's wonderful. It's so good. God, I need to replay Okami. I've only played through it a couple times. It's really long too. Like you'll get to a point where it feels like the narrative is wrapping up and you're like, "Oh, this is the final dungeon." And then you're a third into the game and it just keeps escalating.
so let's jump into the news. Our first headline this week is that Sean Layden, so he's a former PlayStation executive, and I was going to start listing his titles, but he had a bunch of different titles over the course of his tenure there. But
He's like a professional executive, right?
yeah. So he says AAA video games are becoming unsustainable. So again, we were just talking about this, but so this comes from Eurogamer, but I got the succinct version down from Video Games Chronicle. But for anyone who doesn't know, yeah, he used to wear various executive hats at Sony Interactive Entertainment, which is the fancy name for the company that's in charge of making PlayStation games. And he left in 2019, but he did this interview with Eurogamer. And he talked about a bunch of stuff. Like, I seriously highly recommend going to check out this interview for anyone listening, because like he kind of went in depth, and I think he said things that he probably should have been enacting while he was at PlayStation if he could have. But this article from Video Games Chronicle is the most interesting thing in my opinion, because it's one of the reasons for the games industry's current hardship. So I'm going to quote him directly here, and it's a bit of a long quote, so bear with me. But he said it really well.
Yeah.
So he said, every generation it costs twice as much to build a game. What costs $1 million on PS1 then costs $2 million on PS2, and then 4 million, then 16 million, and it goes exponentially. So the PS4 generation, which was the last I was associated with, and I was paraphrasing a little bit there, I was associated with, game dev was $150 million if you want to be on top of the line. Or if you want to be top of the line, and that's before marketing. So by that math, PS5 games should eventually reach $300 million to $400 million, and that is just outright not sustainable. So end quote.
Yeah, I mean, your marketing budget is going to be also about equivalent of your production budget in AAA. So like when they say it's like 300 million, they're actually talking about 600 million.
Yeah, and I think the only game that can probably justify a spend of that caliber because they make that back in a weekend is going to be GTA 6.
Yeah, like I mean Rockstar kind of has their own tier of like quadruple A. I didn't like Red Dead Redemption 2 very much, but like it's undeniable that that was just like money on screen the whole time.
Yeah, no, I did like it, but I like, even if I hadn't, like, it's the budget went there, and I playing like looking what they're doing for GTA 6 and how long it's taking them versus like what they did for Red Dead, which only took like 5 years to make, and GTA 6 is probably going to go on, let's see, 2018, so, and it's supposed to come out next year, but people think it's going to get delayed another year. So that's like what, 8 years in development at that point.
Yeah.
So like I wouldn't be surprised if the budget for that game was $1 billion and the marketing spend is another billion, and they make it back. They make that 2 billion back in the first weekend, because even
Yeah.
GTA 5 I think made $1 billion in its first weekend.
Yeah, GTA 5 is like one of the best-selling games of all time. So like Rockstar will make that back no problem, but like that can't be the model for most games.
Yeah. And his statement as well, I have another note here that I wanted to just bring up quickly. So the implication here being that as well, like future games on like whatever the PS6, PS7, like those games, if the budgets keep inflating for PlayStation games, then those budgets are going to reach $1 billion too. And I just don't think your Spider-Mans and your Last of Us games, they're making that much money.
No, which is too bad because they're really good. Like Sony's first-party stuff tends to be fantastic, but it's fantastic because they're making like a polished single-player game that you can play through and finish. And the only way for games to make the kind of money that they need to is for it to be like a job. Like it needs to have multi-monetization streams and stuff. And like that's kind of part of the enshittification of a lot of AAA is that it's like you can't just make a really good game that you can just play through and finish. It has to become like a part of your life now for it to be like worth it, which is really sad.
So he starts to address this a little bit too. So the next quote, and again, this is a little bit longer, so bear with me here. He says, how do we cap that? How do we bring that back? I think a part of that answer is, and it sounds simplistic, but hear me out, I think games are too long. I haven't even opened Red Dead Redemption 2 because I don't have 90 hours. And I'm retired, and I don't have 90 hours. For the longest time, we kept banging on about 100 hours of gameplay. This is going to be awesome. It's 100 hours of gameplay. Like, that's the most important thing to know. That was a metric in the early years when the average gamer was 18 to 23. And when you're 18 to 23, you're time rich and money poor. But as the average age of the gamer moved into the late 20s, the early 30s, well, it's the opposite, right? Maybe you aren't money rich, but you're definitely time poor. So I think our approach is a mismatch to that market, to reality. End quote.
Wow, based suit, I guess, because I very much prefer like a 10-15 hour long super polished experience. When I see like, oh, this game's 150 hours long, what I hear from that is like, so there's probably going to be like a fairly polished campaign that's maybe like 20 hours long, and then another 80 hours of just kind of like cookie cutter repetitive side content on a map. Which like, I don't, if I have a really long flight, sometimes I do just want to like fill bars and make number go up. Like, that's okay. Like, sometimes I just want to get that like grindy lizard brain satisfied, but that's not like a meaningful experience to me. Like, I want a short game where it's super polished. Like we were just talking about that new Indiana Jones game. I'm so stoked to play that because like that looks like, oh, this is like focused. Like I want games that are tight and focused.
Well, I'm just doing a quick search here. I'm sure you can hear my keyboard on the in the recording of the podcast, but I'm looking up the Indiana Jones playtime for how long to beat for Great Circle. I don't even know if there's going to be an answer for it. There isn't at the moment because it's still too new.
No, it comes out. It doesn't actually come out until like 2 days from now.
Oh, is it still not out? I assumed because the reviews were out and the reviews were so last minute, it was already available.
They're doing that thing that I hate a lot, which is you can pay a bunch of extra money to play it a couple of days early. So there are people playing it right now, but I'm playing it on Game Pass because that shit's $100.
Yeah, no. Like if you have Game Pass and access to Game Pass, I definitely recommend playing it there for sure. Because if Xbox is pushing. I accidentally said Xbox, which is kind of funny. But if like Xbox is pushing Game Pass and they're clearly trying to move from being an exclusive games console manufacturer to and like a game developer to just being like kind of third party in a way. And honestly, I have my own issues with like the subscription thing, the movement to subscriptions we've been going, especially with Game Pass constantly going up. But again, when a game like this comes out and you can even subscribe for a month to play $100 game, especially a game like Indiana Jones, which I'm assuming is probably, and I think I did actually read on Video Games Chronicle that maybe it's only like 30 hours to play, 40 hours if you're doing all the, like everything.
Yeah, it's probably not crazy long.
Yeah, so like and a 30 to 40 hour game, and they probably spent, I mean, I'm guessing, I have no idea how much they spent, but if I had to guess, they probably spent anywhere from $100 to $300 million to make this game with or without marketing. It does.
It looks really good. Everything is polished. Like, God, whoever their surface artist is, like, there are some fantastic materials in that game. I think that's a thing that in the last, like, 10 years we've really started to get properly is skin. Remember, like, 7th gen games, skin always looked like plastic and people always looked like mannequins, so it's like the character models were getting so much more detailed, but then everyone's skin was super shiny and that was always super off-putting. Like, hot take, I think the 7th gen is like when games looked their absolute worst. Like PS2 games look better than PS3 games.
I 100% agree. Going back to a PS3 game, even though it's in HD, they still have that PS2 era jank. And they have some nice qualities to them with the resolution and some of but playing like Uncharted 1 on the PS3 without the remasters, like enhancements, it's just like so janky and so dated. So not only does it like you're describing how it looks, like, yeah, the skin and everything, but also
the interfaces are worse. Like, we hadn't really figured out, like, I mean, we've kind of moved into a place where every game kind of has the same control scheme now. Like, we normalized controls in the 6th gen. That was starting to happen, but there was still a lot of like variety in how games could control. And now we've kind of accepted like, well, every game is going to play like a first third person shooter, even if it's not. You know, you're going to steer with the camera, you're going to move with the stick, and then you're going to have like utilities and inventory buttons that are on your D-pad, and you're gonna have like blah blah blah. Interfaces and controls have normalized a lot, but that was starting to happen in that era, but it was still really janky. Like, interfaces are so ugly from those games. Oh my gosh. It's a thing that I didn't notice before, but now I do a lot of UI UX work. And so like now I see bad interfaces and I'm like aghast, like, oh no.
So he did say something else though in that quote that I read, and he was talking about the average age of the gamer. And people listening might think, well, there's lots of kids that play games, and you're right. Like I have a cousin that plays AAA games, but he also plays stuff like Minecraft and Fortnite. And so my takeaway here is a bit of a leap, but I'm thinking like if he's talking about gamers like that, then there must be a serious lean towards for younger gamers to be leaning towards like Fortnite and your Minecraft and your like games as a service, instead of these kids all jumping now onto like the Nintendos and your Xboxes and your PlayStations, playing these AAA single player games, but they keep going back to their bread and butter, their favorite things like the Minecrafts and the Fortnites, like I said. So
mobile is the biggest gaming market. We don't talk about it, but like mobile is the biggest gaming market.
It really is, and I think Xbox actually bought Activision Blizzard King for King. I mean, obviously there's the Activision part of that in the World of Warcraft side, but like I think that the media really undersold how big Candy Crush was part of that deal.
Yeah. I mean, those are games that print money. They don't have super high production costs, and they just make infinity dollars.
So that means there's like an even like, yeah, sure, there's probably some new people entering the PlayStation and the Nintendo and the Xbox ecosystems to play these games, but en masse, it sounds to me like if new people aren't jumping en masse into these ecosystems, then like these budget spends are making less and less sense too, because there's less new people coming in to buy these games, and like less people buying because they have less time to play games. So it just seems like a very, very unsustainable practice to be making a $300 30-hour game.
Well, it's also just like
$300 million. Sorry.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Okay, this is a thing that like I will die on this hill, and I know a lot of people disagree. I cannot tell the difference between a PS4 and a PS5 game. If I squint, I can tell. And I know that like, oh, it'll output at like a higher resolution with a better frame rate, but it is the absolute most marginal incremental jump between generations I've ever seen. Like, so we're talking about spending twice as much for something that looks like a little bit better. There's nothing that is on the PS5 that couldn't be on the PS4 with a bit of kijiggering. I know they'll be like, oh, well, like the Ratchet and Clank game, like you couldn't do that teleporting stuff with the SSD. I'm like, sure you could. You could find a way to make that work.
Well, the example I really like to go back to is Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 1 versus Rebirth, which is Part 2. So you said like games look marginally better on the PS5. In some cases, obviously that's true. Like Spider-Man 2 looks a little bit better than Spider-Man 1, 100%. But when I play Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, it actually looks worse than Remake, because Remake was built for the PS4. Like they knew exactly what they were doing towards the end of that generation. Whereas Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is so ambitious that if you want 60 FPS, it looks muddy in the open world. It looks so bad. The performance is janky. If you want 30 FPS, yeah, then the resolution goes up and it looks a little bit more crisp, but it doesn't look nearly as good as 30 or 60 FPS does for Remake, even on the PS4. So I agree with you with the caveat that like I don't even think PS5 games look better than PS4 games.
It's yeah, and it's like again, it's like it's a value proposition where it's like, you know, I'm 33, so I grew up with like an N64, and then when I went from an N64 to like a PS2 when I was like, I don't know, like 12, like holy crap, that was a jump. Like wow, this looks like real life. And then, you know, the jump from PS2 to like, I got an Xbox 360 for the first one of that gen. That was also like a pretty huge, substantial leap. And then I went from 7th gen to like, I got a PS4, I think was my first 8th gen console. And then I'm like, hey, this looks quite a bit better, I guess. And now I'm like, I have an Xbox Series S because it was cheap and Game Pass is a really good deal. But like, I don't think I would buy a new console. I don't see why I would. Like it's, I want to play I want to play Nintendo games. I will buy whatever Nintendo puts out. Like they're litigious and you know whatever, but like they have the best game designers in the industry right now. I want to play their games.
Me too.
But like There's nothing coming out on PlayStation or Xbox that makes me want to get like a new $500 box and then spend $100 a pop for a game.
Oh, that's just it too, because when Xbox was trying to buy Activision Blizzard King, which we talked about earlier, and all the FCC and all the court cases and all the legal stuff that was going on, it did leak that PlayStation was aiming for 2027, maybe 2028 for their PS6. Or at least I don't know if they referred to it as PS6 necessarily, but they would have said their next console. I think that's too early. I think we need to go to like longer generations, like 10 to 12 years, because first off, it feels like this generation's barely started, but also the games still look like, well, crap. So like to jump to the PS6, and even they just came out with the PS5 Pro, and half the games that are running on the Pro actually look worse because the way it works, it just like, and again, I'm not technical, so I don't actually know all the ins and outs, but like,
yeah, they're doing some
worse.
kind of like AI upscaling stuff to make them look better or whatever. I don't know how that works either. Well, like, you want to talk about incremental upgrades? I can squint and see that PS5 games look better than PS4 games. I can't even squint and see if a PS5 Pro game looks better. I will have the screenshots right beside one another, and I couldn't tell which is which if they weren't already labeled.
Yeah, when they zoomed in when they did the presentation, and I could go on for hours about this, but when they did the presentation, they zoomed into the background of Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. And they were like, look, you can see the person's face in the background slightly better than before. And it's like, when I'm running and gunning with Ratchet and Clank,
who cares?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's too bad. Well, because like, and it's like, I have like my optimistic idea of where this can go, because AAA is completely unsustainable. I think that for the last like decade or so, they've been trying to push games as a service. And they haven't succeeded. Like, Concord was kind of this like, I don't know, Concord felt like a tipping point because Sony dumped like some preposterous amount of money into that and it sold one copy. Because there is not space in the market for 25 Fortnites, right? There's space in the market for like a couple big games as a service games, because the people who are playing those, the people who are putting money into those, they are not playing 20 different games a year. They are playing that one game for 5 years straight. That is their game that they play. There isn't space in the market for that many. Like there's space in the market for a few. Like you can have a few of those games, but for the entire AAA industry to have tried to pivot towards this, it was always doomed to fail. Like it's like they fundamentally didn't understand that there just isn't a market for 25 games like this. And you have like Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League, and God, what are some other, like the Avengers game, and like all of these things that try to, it's a shame because like those two games I just mentioned, if you pull out all of the loot grinding crap, if you pull out all of the...
No, the Avengers was good. The Avengers was good as a single player game.
Like there could have been a good game there, but instead they have to bolt on all of this unnecessary progression systems. Like oh, I keep going back to Indiana Jones, but like when they were doing the gameplay reveal for Indiana Jones, that's what I was waiting for, Like I was waiting for them to cut to like, and then here we go to the Indiana Jones customization store, and you can get this Indiana Jones hat, but it's got like cool fire decals, and it's only $11. Like that's what I was waiting for.
Well, hopefully it sells well. So, or at least does well on Game Pass at the very least. Again, I'm not really encouraging people to go out and spend $100 on AAA games, because I also think the price of AAA games, especially in Canada, is getting ridiculous.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I want it to sell well. So studios see that and they go, oh, okay. First off, I do want to see more good licensed games, because I think there are a lot of movies and a lot of comic books that have very interesting stories and worlds that I want to run around in. But
Alien Isolation is like one of the best games of the last 15 years. It's so insanely good. And it's like so beautifully crafted. It's like, oh my God, that game was still
so good. They put it in they referenced it in Alien Romulus, which is the new movie that came out this year.
I haven't seen that yet. I want to. I hear it's quite good.
It is very good.
I really want to see it. I love me some Alien. Yeah, so I'm super stoked to play indie but yeah, like I want it to do good, because it's like you can't turn AAA games into mobile games, but also you have to if you're going to be spending $300 million on every game. So it's like, I work at a studio with 20 people. I have no idea what our actual financials are, but it's like I know for a fact that our game doesn't cost that much money, and we're making something that is beautiful and it looks and sounds really, really good. And it's like, God, take that $300 million production budget and cut it into like 20 smaller budgets and give them to like smaller teams to have them do like what A24 or like Blumhouse is doing with movies, where it's just like, fund a lot of less expensive projects, and then you only need a couple of them to be successful to make up for the rest of them.
Yep. AA games. I don't know if you call them that, but I think we need more AA games. And the only company that's really making them is the only big company. I know indies are making lots of AA games, but the only company that's making AA games now is Nintendo.
Nintendo is amazing at like making a game look more expensive than it is. Like, what is a Switch? A Switch is like a mid-range Android tablet from like 8 years ago. That is not a powerful device, and yet lots of like, first-party Nintendo games on Switch still look great. And like, I don't need games to look like modern AAA games do, not at the cost of like their quality and an unsustainable business model and like all of my friends getting laid off. Like, it doesn't make sense.
Well, on that note, let's breeze through the next 3 news stories. We'll make these quicker. So the next story is that it seems like Elden Ring 2 is not happening. So Hidetaka Miyazaki confirmed recently that there are no plans for a sequel.
Good.
But they could still make one in the future.
Good. I mean, I think that what that team is doing, which is like, I mean, Elden Ring 2 is going to happen in the same way that Elden Ring is just Dark Souls 4. Like, they have like a set of mechanics and a style and a structure that is kind of like, Bloodborne and Elden Ring and Dark Souls. I would all consider them kind of like part of, like, they're not actually part of the same series, but they're kind of part of the same series, They all have the same like core DNA, and I really like it when they come up with a new setting and a new approach to stuff. Like Sekiro is like way too hard, first of all, but also like, oh, cool, like dark fantasy feudal Japan ninja game, sick. And then Bloodborne is like cool gothic horror. Like, I don't want them to make a sequel to Elden Ring. I want to see what else they can come up with,
Yeah, no, you hit all the points. So the only thing I want to note for listeners of future episodes is that when the news is slow, and especially we don't have a lot of queer news, I'm trying my best to find games that have a big queer following to follow up on news on. So stuff like Pokemon, Sonic the Hedgehog, Elden Ring, like FromSoft, like, and obviously that list is much longer, and I've been building up that list and doing research to see what people might want to hear about. But that's the reason I'm including Elden Ring too, because I don't play Elden Ring at all. I don't play Souls-like games, but I'm going to start including stories like that. And it's why I've had Amy Lynn on in the past to talk about Sonic for like an hour, right? Because Sonic has a huge queer following. But let's move on to, sorry to cut you off.
It's okay.
PlayStation's 30th anniversary was this week, and they added limited time themes to the PS5 based on previous console generations. So we were talking a little bit about PS2 earlier and stuff. So I'm sure people are hearing this and going, themes are back on the PS5. And yes, it is a good thing. So when you boot up and it's kind of a good thing, there's like a big asterisk there, but when you boot up your PlayStation 5, it should ask you if you want to apply the 30th anniversary content. When you click yes, it'll ask you which generation you want. And then the next time you boot your PS5 up, by default, it will be the PS1 startup logo and sound. So no matter which console generation you choose, but then when you get to the main menu, you will be able to see the console generation you chose. And also you will be able to switch between them at will. So right now I've got PS4 because I miss the PS4's design. But I've also gone through the PS2 because I'm nostalgic for that as well. But it's for a limited time. And when I say limited time, that doesn't mean like, oh, you have a week to claim the code that gets you these themes. No, I mean, it's like Nintendo putting Mario 35 up on the eShop for like 6 months. Like, and we don't know how long the limited time is, but basically the themes will go away from your console after the 30th anniversary event is up. So personally, I think that's shitty. I'm disappointed in PlayStation because they've got this really good thing that they're dangling like a carrot, and then they're just going to pull it away at the last second. It's like the football in Peanuts. So
I don't have a PS5. Do they not have themes?
No. So I think they really wanted to replace themes with when you hover on a game icon on your screen, it creates a theme under that window. And I think they wanted to like emphasize that, but the way they implemented the theme for at least the consoles is like it's still above that. Like when you go into the game's theme, quote unquote, that overwrites the previous theme that's on your base, like on your console proper. It's hard to explain, especially without showing it, and we're an audio podcast, but
Yeah.
like for example, on the PS4, there's like, it's known for having that like wavy blue line at the top of the screen. So they put that underneath the game icon list, and then when you hover on the game, then it plays like the music from the game. It shows you a screenshot from what the last thing you did in the game or whatever, and then it shows you all the details for that game. But you can still see.
It goes onto attract mode. It goes onto attract mode like an arcade machine for that game.
Basically. And also the other thing too is that like when you're selecting things, the sounds from that console play. So if they wanted to add a Final Fantasy theme, they could add a lot of Final Fantasy like clicky sounds, for example. So like I don't think it's impossible for them to have a theme. Option.
No, obviously it's all there.
Yeah. So
like everything.
Change...
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I was just gonna say I hope they change their mind and make this permanent. Basically, what were you gonna say?
I can't remember, but also I would love a Final Fantasy theme because the clicky button sounds in Final Fantasy menus are great.
Yeah, I agree. And I have a really great Tifa theme from my PS4 that my partner and I really want to come back. So it'd be cool if like they found a way to kind of merge those things, or at least make a new version of it. But anyway, if Nintendo is getting rid of themes and PlayStation's getting rid of themes, I'm sure Xbox will in their next generation, and then we just won't have themes anymore. It's great.
Final Fantasy is a big blind spot for me. I think the only Final Fantasy game I've ever finished is 12. And I definitely want to go through like 6, 7, and 9 for sure, and then see if I like the other ones. I have a playthrough going of Final Fantasy 7, which, oh my,
the original or the remake?
So I started playing the remake when it was on like PS Plus like years ago, and I got bored in like 3 hours. I was like, this is so unbearably slow. And then I started playing the PS1 game, and like at the same playtime, I was like at like the Shinra HQ, and shit was popping off, and it was like, I was really, really hype, and I really, really enjoyed it. And yeah, I don't know if the remake is for me.
That's fair. I had the same issue with the first 5 hours or so of the remake. Until like, because there's that opening scene where they're blowing up the Mako, whatever it is, and then they go back later. I think they go back multiple times, but that first arc where they go back and they're like, we're really gonna do this, and then like you said, shit starts popping off. That happens about 5 or 6 hours into the remake, and that's where I was like, okay, I get why people like this game, because at first I was like, this is just kind of, and people are probably gonna like shoot me for this, but I was like, this is kind of cringy. This is kind of weird. Like it just feels like an anime that I'm playing without any reason for me to keep playing, but it got really good after a while.
It felt like, because I hadn't played Final Fantasy VII, and it felt like I would have enjoyed it a lot more if I had a lot of nostalgia for that game, because it was like, it felt like it was referencing a source material that wasn't present in my mind.
I mean, that's fair, but I also hadn't played the original either. The first time I played any Final Fantasy was Remake, and it was this year when I played it, and I fell in love with the series, I fell in love with the characters, I fell in love with the story and the world, and then like, I was gonna wait for like a significant discount on Rebirth because I was like, I have a big backlog. But as soon as I finished the DLC for Remake, the Yuffie expansion, I went and bought it at full price. I mean, I waited for like the slightest sale, but that happened to happen like right after I finished playing, so I got lucky. But like I had to play Rebirth, and Rebirth is more of the same, where they kind of stretch everything out that's already in the middle section of the original game. So I think if you didn't like Remake, you definitely won't like Rebirth. And definitely stick with the original for sure. But
I'm shocked at how good the original was. Like, because I mean, I guess, you know, I was going into it like kind of like, oh, it's probably going to be like an old janky JRPG, and then as soon as I booted it up, and it's like do 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 do, and like you're on the bombing run for the Mako reactor, and like you're with your boys, and shit's popping off and going absolutely nuts like right away. And the entire Midgar section of the game was insanely like fast paced and exciting and cinematic, and I loved it. I'm still in like the first disc. I need to pick up that playthrough again, but I was like, oh, why did nobody tell me that Final Fantasy VII was a good game? Who knew?
So let's move on to the last article, and then we'll jump into our interview. But this is actually kind of an exciting headline here. So this also comes from Video Games Chronicle. EA has made 23 more of its accessibility patents free for any studio to use. So you can say what you want about EA's business practices, and you should absolutely say what you want to say about EA's business practices and like their repetitive video games and their like cookie cutter stuff. But what they're doing with these patents is actually really cool, and it's a good thing. And I will praise them where credit is due. But so basically, EA have a program for making their accessibility patents free for any game developer to use. No cost, no hassle, no strings attached.
That's sick.
Zoe, you could use them if you wanted to.
Yeah, we just hired a new designer at our studio, and a big focus of his career was accessibility. So probably not for launch because we're launching in like a month, but they're definitely interested in, I think, incorporating some of his ideas for accessibility into like future updates. Well, like, we're launching into early access, so it's still kind of a work in progress. But yeah, accessibility is really cool, and it's the kind of thing that like I don't tend to look at accessibility settings that much just because I don't need them. But then every once in a while I'll see like, I think it was like The Last of Us 2, where it's like, if you have vision issues, you can literally recolor the game so that everything is like gray boxed except for enemies, which are red, so that like you can be very nearly blind and probably still be able to play it. And I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, and honestly, I use a lot of accessibility features. But I think accessibility helps everyone. So when I see people on the internet complaining about an accessibility option, making things more accessible and more approachable for people, and just giving more people opportunities to play something, like if someone wants to play, like if they make an accessibility option for a game like Dark Souls to make it easy so someone can at least play it, like
it's such a bizarre thing to be mad at. Like you don't have to use it. It doesn't affect you. It's like people talking about like an easy mode in a Dark Souls game, where it's like, you don't have to use it, right? Like there isn't someone with a gun to your head making you play it on easy.
Yeah. And your experience with the game is not any less valid because you played on easy mode.
Yeah, I don't understand it. Like, I think that there's like still a large contingent of like gamers that have like too much of their self-esteem tied up to their cool private exclusive club of being someone who plays video games, and they just get mad for no reason whenever anything is meant to be a little bit more inclusive or whatever. And it's like, it's weird. And like they always come up with these like arguments that like don't make any sense. They're like, oh, like you're diverting development budget to this. I'm like, it's not that expensive. Most of these accessibility settings are not that expensive. Like, so one of your...
The only time I've actually... Sorry to cut you off. You reminded me. The only time I've had a problem with accessibility... I don't know why this came to me, but when The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered came out, they added a bunch of accessibility features, and then those new accessibility features were not added to the vanilla version of Last of Us Part 2 on PS4. And I think that's the only time I've ever actually had a complaint about accessibility.
Yeah, it's... I think The Last of Us specifically were the ones where I was seeing like people showing off accessibility issues, and I was like, damn, that's cool. Yeah, accessibility is a good thing. It's so weird, the things that people get mad at.
So, and just to tie back into the article, there are 23 new patents for a total of 38. Some of them include intelligent personalized speech recognition, generating expressive speech audio from text data, dynamically selecting speech functionality on client devices. I'm not going to lie, I was reading through all the patents they've made available, and I wasn't exactly sure how all of them might apply to a game. That said, none of them were bad things to have, and if they're available for free for anyone to use, and if they help at least one person, then I think that is a good thing, and it's a win.
It sounds like a lot of these are designed to work in tandem with AI. Like parsing and generating speech, like that's something that I know. I mean, I imagine a company like EA probably wants to do something with AI.
Yeah, and I think AI to some extent, if it's helping you do something so you can divert something monotonous, that you can now divert resource to something better, like something creative, something a little more meaningful, and you can like basically put that part of your job aside. Like when I'm editing in Premiere at work, and I can do like a simple task that I would have like spent 4 hours doing, and now I can do 1 hour, and it's not a creative task. It's just like, here's all these annoying button presses I was going to do before, and now I can automate those. That's the word I was looking for, was automation. And now I can automate those. I think that's a good thing. I think it's when AI is taking away from jobs is when AI becomes problematic. So I just wanted to delineate that for any listeners.
Yeah, I mean, my previous job, I was working at a startup that ran out of money and we got laid off. And we had this crazy AI FOMO that was like, it was really weird because, I'm a programmer, and we had two other programmers who made up the dev team. And then there were like these two executives who were our bosses of this startup. And the bosses are like, we got to use AI. It's money on the table. Like literally that phrase, it's money on the table. And we're like, okay, how? And they're like, I don't know. We just got to use it. And it was like this mad scramble to try and incorporate AI into our app without like an actual idea of how it was going to work, because it turns out AI is kind of bad at most. Like AI is not going to be taking a lot of jobs anytime soon because it's bad at almost every job that you might automate with it. Like anything that AI does is usually like, it passes the sniff test. Like you generate an image and you're like, oh, this is a good looking image, but also it's not going to match like technical specifications that are very specific. It's not going to actually like, be the same as something that's outputted by an AI generated 3D mesh. This was like a specific thing that happened where, our executives were like, oh, well, we can use it for mesh generation and that can get a lot more like, assets into our game, right? So then it's like, okay, well, here is an AI generated mesh. And then he handed it off to our technical artist and was like, try to implement this. We want to see if this is viable. So then she comes back like a couple days later and she's like, this is unusable garbage. Like it would take as much time to fix this asset as it would to just create a new asset from scratch. Because yeah, it looks like a 3D model. It looks like, oh, this looks like a convincing thing that it's supposed to be. But then you actually open it up in a 3D art program and you see that the topology is all completely fucked up. There's 100 times more vertexes than there needs to be. Like the edge flow and just every single part of the model is busted. It just kind of passingly looks like the thing that it's supposed to be while actually being unusable garbage. And I think that that's a lot of AI stuff, is that it's like, it's convincing for people who don't know what they're looking at,
Yeah, for sure. And actually, now that you're talking about your experience in the industry, it's a really good segue to just like jump straight into the interview.
Oh, wow. That was slick. You're good at this.
I'm getting better. We're 11 episodes in. I'm trying to make myself a little more buttery and smooth with these, but and since we've broken a lot of the ice, I was gonna ask you about your favorite video games, and you've talked a little bit about that. But I'll save one of these questions for the end, just to kind of like top it all off. But first, I just want to jump into the more you questions about your experience in the industry. So, what do you do in the games industry exactly?
So I am a programmer and technical artist at Astrolabe Interactive, which is a small studio in Montreal. Our office is in the Gay Village, which is cool. It's very crowded during Pride, but it's like, I leave work at the end of the day and Pride is happening. So that was neat. I'm a programmer and technical artist, so I work under two other more senior programmers, and they tend to handle a lot of the higher level like software architecture and like networking code and like the big difficult grown-up stuff. I'm a junior, so I handle a lot of like UI UX implementation, bug fixing. I as a technical artist, I also do like asset implementation. So basically like our artists will produce, new assets, and then I take the raw art and then turn it into like a usable object within the game. So like attaching all of the associated scripts and making sure that it exists in our game's like, pool of objects and stuff. It's really cool because like I'm very new to my career. Like I finished school, like April of 2023. So I've only really been working full-time as a game developer for about a year. And then I also had like another like year and a half of experience before that, where like when I was in school, I was working at a studio, as a research assistant for a game studio. So like, yeah, I get to wear a lot of hats now and I'm getting a lot of skill. The programmers I work under are really, really cool and talented, and like they're brilliant. Like I feel like I'm learning a lot under them. And yeah, sorry, I'm kind of rambling, but like, that's
you're answering. It's a lot of information. It's a lot of good information, and you're covering a lot of questions too. So you kind of talked about like what you kind of do, but like, can you describe what a typical day might be like for you? Because I don't know if there's any way you're doing all of those tasks that you do in the same day. I mean, but
it'll be like a subset of them. Like a typical day will be like, I usually come into work early. I'm a morning person, which makes it hard to date. But like I get up really early most days, and so I'll usually be in our office like like an hour before scrum and just start like plugging away at stuff. So that's when I will usually wrap up whatever I was too anxious to get home to finish the previous day. We'll have our scrum, and that's like, if you don't work in software development, a scrum is kind of like a very quick meeting where everyone just sort of like summarizes like, hey, here's what I did yesterday, here's what I'm going to do today. And we have one of those every day. That's where either I will know what I'm working on, or like sometimes we might need to pivot because, you know, it's a small team, so everyone wears a lot of hats. I'll typically do one of like, I'm either implementing new assets where it's like I'm, you know, like I said, I'm taking art that our artists have done and I'm turning those into workable game objects. Or I might be like, you know, writing code for like a new feature. Like I did our achievement implementation. I did like our bug reporter menu, that kind of thing. Or I'll be fixing bugs. Like there's always a backlog of a shitzillion Jira tickets that you can do. And it's like, you know, some of those are like 20-minute fixes. Other ones look like 20-minute fixes. And then 4 hours later, I'm crying. Yeah, it's usually I'll do like 2 or 3 big tasks in a day like that. But because as a programmer and a technical artist, I have a lot of different things that I can do. So I'm usually jumping between those. And then there's also stuff that'll come up where like, you know, our level designer might notice that there's a problem with one of our items that I'll have to like tweak, like, oh, this has the wrong material assigned to it. Then I'll have to go, you know, through our art and just like figure out what was implemented wrong. And sometimes that's just me making up for a mistake that I made previously. But other times it's like, you know, our artist might have changed a material, and then when they modified the file, anything that was using that now, like maybe not all of their geometry lines up with the material.
That's really interesting, actually. That was very technical, but I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed personally hearing about that, because like when a lot of video game interviews talks a lot about the creative side, and I still think that's creative, but like it's also the technical side of that creative coin. So I think that's super interesting.
I really love what I do a lot. Like I'm very, very happy. My studio is amazing. It's super duper chill. You know, it's like a loft. Our game is called a loft, but it is a loft office. You know, kind of in like a cool neighborhood, I think some people consider it to be like a bit of a neighborhood in decline, but I like where we work. And, you know, everyone is really passionate. Like I get to work with people who it's kind of what I fantasized about when I imagined going into game development. And like, you know, I was kind of anticipating that it's hard to find work in games, especially now. So I was like, I'm probably not going to get something super great. Like I'm probably just going to be like in the debug mines for the first few years of my career. But I'm at this studio where it's like so like vibrant and fast paced and fun, and everyone's really talented. And it's just like a wonderful energy. I really, really like it. I can't remember what question I was answering. I'm sorry.
No, we went straight through. You answered my previous question, and then you segued into the next question I was going to ask you, and you answered it, which was what brings you joy about making video games.
Oh, God. It's magic. It's actual magic. Like when I was like probably like really young, like 5 years old, like I love The Legend of Zelda. You know, I played all of like the old Zelda games, and I absolutely loved like trying to come up with my own ideas for dungeons. Like you would find my like notebooks as a kid full of like maps and diagrams of like levels that I wanted to make. So that was always a thing that I thought was really interesting. You know, creating worlds, like, yeah, I mean, it's magic. You're like bringing a space into creation. It feels very cool, and I wear fingerless gloves when I'm writing code because that makes me feel like a cool hacker in a movie.
Oh, that's adorable. I like that.
Yeah.
So maybe more generally, because you talked about where you work and where you worked previously, but like what in general, like what's the Montreal game dev scene like?
It is, I think Montreal is one of like the best game dev cities in the world, apparently. At least that's what we tell ourselves. I am new to the industry, so I don't necessarily have like a strong frame of reference for what it's like in other places, but I do know that like lots of major studios have their either headquarters or branches here. I think that, yeah, like here, and then I think Seattle is another big one, and then I think San Francisco is another big one, but like this is, in North America, this is like one of the game dev cities. And I think part of that is because the government offered tax incentives for game studios to open up here. It's bilingual, which is learning French is hard. I'm doing it, but oh my gosh, it's really difficult. We have Ubisoft here, which is definitely like the biggest God, if Ubisoft, if their Assassin's Creed game does not sell 1 billion copies, there are going to be a lot of unemployed game devs in the city.
I'm really hoping it's successful, yeah, because
I mean,
we have a studio here too for Ubisoft, so
it's definitely like one of those situations where like the industry is going through a really hard time right now, and it's like there are a lot of like bad business practices and games that I don't think are very good and all of that stuff. But like also this is the industry that I work in, and like even if I play a game that's like a big piece of crap, like I know that there was probably really passionate people behind it, and like I don't want them to go hungry. So like now when games flop, like it definitely has it's definitely attached with a sensation of like, oh God, I hope they don't get laid off for this or whatever. I have, like nobody goes into making games just, at least on the development side of things, like nobody goes into making games just because like they want to get rich or whatever. I think usually when games are bad, it's like an executive or a management problem, but like every single team always has incredibly talented people because like, especially for programmers, like I could go into like cybersecurity or AI or some other tech bullshit and probably make a lot more money than I do, but I have to make games. I love it. It's not a thing that people go into just for funsies. Well, I know it is a thing people go into for funsies. It's just like people aren't just like coming into this to make a buck. So like, every studio. Yeah. So the scene in Montreal is a lot of unemployment right now because we have a lot of studios. I don't know if we've been as hard hit as other places. Like I have a friend who works at Behavior, which is probably the second biggest studio here. And I think they recently announced some layoffs. Like she didn't get hit, thank goodness. And I know that like a lot of studios are doing layoffs. It's not a great time to be in the games industry. I'm very lucky. Like I really love my studio, and I definitely I think that we're kind of well insulated against a lot of the stuff that's happening in the industry right now. Our game is like on track to be successful. We have a lot of Steam wish lists, and we have a fair deal of marketing. We're independent, but we are working with a publisher that is going to help like promote it and with like QA and stuff. So like, we're on track to hopefully be pretty successful, which means that we can keep existing for like, if I could stay here for a couple of years, and then, I mean, even a few years, like I really like where I'm working. Hopefully that'll be kind of like a bunker and I can avoid most of like the bad stuff in the industry right now. Yeah, I'm kind of rambling at this point. Things are dire in the games industry.
Well, your story is pretty hopeful. And we've talked about it a little bit off podcast, but I wanted to ask you, because you said you only got into game dev a year and a half ago. So I'm curious what inspired you to get into game development at that time.
Oh, yeah. So, like I'm trans and I transitioned a few years ago. And kind of when my egg cracked, which I guess for people who don't know the lingo is like just kind of like realizing that you're trans. Up until that point in my life, I'd been very depressed. I was like a huge alcoholic. I had a long history of very dark, bad stuff that I won't get too much into the details of, but I was completely miserable for my whole life. And I never really got my shit together just because I was living as like the wrong person. So then when my egg cracked, it was like, I don't know, it was like a switch flipped in my brain, and suddenly I actually was like, I gave a shit about myself all of a sudden. So I was like, okay, well, I hadn't had any like education or anything before, so it's like, well, I've got to go back to school. I didn't actually initially plan to go into game development. I studied like programming. Like I got a degree in like software development, which, was kind of safer because, generally speaking, games are not the most, viable route for a developer if your goal is like, to like make money and be independent and stuff. But in my free time, I started teaching myself game engines. It's actually kind of crazy how much work I put in over like the years that I was in school, because I was transitioning while also studying, and like my school was pretty difficult. Like there's a lot of assignments and it was all like project based, while also teaching myself game dev, which I probably put as many hours into that in my free time as like the actual stuff that I was doing for school. But then I started to get a sense that like, oh, I'm actually like, I can totally do this. Like the best opportunity I had was when one of my cohort in school was like, hey Zoe, you are into virtual reality, right? Because I was super into VR at the time. I still think VR is really cool, but I also have my compunctions about where that industry is going. So they kind of pointed me to this research studio that was run out of our campus, where students could participate in the development of games, like as contractors for companies. And I was very uniquely positioned for it because the vast majority, like everyone who worked at my studio was an artist. Like it was for the game art students. Our school didn't have a game dev program, but it had a game art program. So they had all of these artists, but they didn't have any programmers outside of the two research leads who were like leading the studio. So what ended up happening was, oh, I'm a programmer and I know game engines, and I'm probably like one of the only people on campus that actually has the skill set to be hired at this studio from outside of the game art program. And it was really good for me because then, games kind of felt like a moonshot while I was in school. But by working as a research assistant, I managed to get like some actual like professional experience before I graduated. Nothing like huge. I didn't work on anything big, but it was like, my first project was a VR meditation game for a company that was making a brain computer interface. Where it basically like you would wear like one of those EEG headbands, and then you would play a meditation game in VR that would like score you based on the output of the EEG and stuff, which is really cool. It was very like, that was my first paid dev work, and that was when I got a sense like, oh man, this is really cool. Like I'm doing cool stuff. Now conceptually, I think that like scoring someone's meditation is kind of a little weird, but like that's fine. I didn't design the game. Who cares? And then, so I got to work at a game called like Krog, which was something that was just like a little internal project. And then I got bounced between various like projects that we got hired for. So by the time I graduated, I had worked on like 3 or 4 different commercial projects. And also on like tools. Like if tools are a really good thing to go into, because like if you can build the tools that other like programmers and developers are going to use, like you're going to make yourself very valuable to a studio. Then I graduated. My capstone game, well, like I said, I studied software development, so I wasn't actually in game development. So every time we had an assignment that was like a project that we had a lot of like control over, that we could design and stuff, I would always be pushing for them to let me make games. And after my second year, they just gave up trying to stop me. They usually encouraged people to not make games, but like at that point I was pretty like solidified in like my desired career path, where it's like, no, I'm going into game development. If you want to help me like be successful, let me do games for my projects. And then eventually they let me. So my capstone project was like kind of my finest hour, where all of the IT programs in our school, that were finishing that year broke into teams of like, I think like 2 to 5 people. They, again, strongly discouraged you to make a game, and they strongly discouraged you from solo development because it was meant to be like a big project. So I developed a VR stealth game. It was like way too ambitious, and I made this prototype in like 12 weeks. And it was like, I built it for Quest 2. I was one of the only projects that actually like compiled and built my game. Most people were just like running them out of like editors and stuff. And I made like this cool cyberpunk VR stealth game. I created a guard state machine that, it was simple. Like I only had 12 weeks to make it. And like I bought an art kit from a company called Cinti on the Unity Asset Store, which basically was just like a lot of kind of prefabbed 3D assets that you can use for game projects. Cinti makes really good stuff. It's great for prototyping because it's like, art takes a long time to make. And if you're just making a functional, the purpose of the project wasn't to show off my art skills, it was to show off my programming skills. So I made a really cool guard state machine that would patrol around. I created like a custom node pathing system where you could easily in the editor define what the patrol routes of guards were. They would detect the player if they saw you for like a couple seconds, and it had it was a fully featured enemy AI. I was really, really proud of it. So that I presented that at an expo, which our school ran, which was basically just everyone presenting their capstone projects, and people from the industry would kind of walk around and check it out. And apparently all of my cohort told me that my game was the only thing that anyone was talking about, because I brought my VR headset, and I was we each got a booth, and it was like an 8x8 foot booth, and I basically just cleared mine out to make it a VR play space. That then anyone could play my game and give it a shot. And then out of the 70 or so projects that we had, mine won second place overall.
Congratulations.
I was the only person in the top 10 that was like solo developed. Like I think most of the top 10 were like teams of like 5 or 6 people. So yeah, I was really proud of that. And that was kind of when I realized like, oh, I might actually like have a shot at this. Like, I look back at the code that I wrote then, and this is like a couple years ago, and I'm like, oh yeah, that was janky. Like I could do that a lot better now. I am actually kind of doing it better now for one of my things that I'm making in my free time. But that was kind of my first moment where I got a taste of like, I actually have a really good shot at this, because then like, I got interviewed by like the campus newspaper, and like I had a thing that I could like share on my LinkedIn and stuff. That you kind of have to know how to market yourself. Like I don't necessarily like the very businessy side of things, but it is like a reality. And I think that like I did a really good job when I was in school of kind of understanding like it's not actually about being a good programmer. It's about looking like you're a good programmer. I don't necessarily think that there's any code in my game that was much more difficult or complicated than what the other students had made, but I made something that was a lot more like visually impressive, and it kind of had that wow factor in a way that like, someone's like phone app or something, which very well could have been a more impressive piece of code than mine, but also it's not sexy, So yeah, like I got good at school at like getting experience, building a portfolio of work, so that when I graduated and I came to Montreal, and then I moved here shortly after, then it was like, okay, I am going to try to get into the games industry. And everyone is like, you're dumb as shit. That's a bad idea. And I'm like, I know, but I did it anyways.
Well, you seem to be doing good at it. So
yeah, I'm still at the start of my career. Like I'm making junior money. I'm not making that big senior team lead money yet, but I do think that I'm good. I love programming itself as well. Like it's not just the games. Like programming is inherently like a very fun thing. Like I'm autistic, and I think that it's just like, my particular variant of autism, it just like hooks into the kind of like logic and problem solving of programming really well, and I enjoy it. It's fun. So I do think that like I have a lifetime of learning ahead of me, but that's good, because when I learn new things, my brain releases the happy chemical, and you need to find the thing that makes your brain release the happy chemical, because then the motivation to be successful will come a lot more easily. And I'm very lucky that the thing that releases the happy chemical for me is something that also syncs up with like a solid career path. Because like I see people with like wonderful, amazing passions, but also like it's a thing that it's only ever going to be like a hobby, which is okay. But it's like, then they'll end up doing stuff for work that they just don't enjoy as much. And it's like, that's too bad, because that's like so much of your time. I really like what I do.
So I have kind of a double pointed question here. So I want to ask you what it's like being a trans woman working in the video game industry, but also you're openly trans, but also you pass very well, and a lot of people might not know that you're trans. Additionally, you started your career as Zoe, so no one knew who you were before. So I also want to ask you what that was like too.
It was great. I guess I'll go point by point. So like, I think that I've gotten very lucky. In my career, I honestly don't think I've really experienced any kind of like discrimination or harassment. I think Montreal, like Canada overall, is like a pretty good place to be trans, and like, compared to many other places. And then Montreal specifically has like a really, really solid queer community. Like I love this city. So our culture here is like pretty accepting. I think I pass, but it also can be tricky to like know like, oh, are people just being polite or whatever? But I think I've gotten like misgendered twice in like years. Like, I don't think people are clocking me. So I definitely don't really get any like explicit discrimination in my day to day. And that also translates to like work. The games industry here is very like inclusive, I think. I have friends who have been in the industry for a lot longer and are successful. So like that should mean something, who might have different opinions about that. But I think it is pretty good to be trans in the games industry. I think like, again, like I've only worked kind of like in indie and small stuff where it's been great. Like I'm openly trans at work. I'm pretty good friends with one of our programmers, and I was out having a drink with him after work recently, and we kind of got to talking about it. And like I had a couple drinks, so like, I was a little emboldened to be like, hey, did you clock me when I started working here? And he was like, no, I didn't know you were trans until you told me. But I am open about it. It's maybe too open. I've made some really, really funny jokes that like nobody's laughed at, but I'm like, damn it, that was hilarious. But it's like trans humor. Yeah, so I mean, my experiences being trans have been really good. I am very happy that I was able to transition. I mean, I'm not happy about how late I transitioned because in a lot of ways it feels like what I'm doing now is what I was always supposed to be doing. And I had a lot of years where I was like a miserable bastard before I figured it out. So now I'm 33 and it kind of feels like, you know, in a different progression of my life, if I had known that I was trans earlier, this is what I would have just ended up doing anyways. Because I wanted to make games ever since I was a kid, and then I gave up on it when the depression and shit kicked in with puberty. So, you know, but having the entirety of my career contained within my transition is great because I don't have like, you know, I don't have to put any of like the random jobs that I had beforehand on my resume. And then, you know, I have to explain like, yeah, but you know, if you call them for a reference, ask about this person because that's my dead name or whatever. Like that would be a nightmare. So it's just all of my experiences under Zoe, and that's all anyone in my industry has ever known me as, which is great. I try to keep my dead name relatively secret. I'm sure if someone looked hard enough, they could find it, but yeah, I don't think anyone knows that. But I don't hide that I'm trans. I like to pass like in public just because I think a lot of the time we talk about passing like, you know, oh, it's for safety and stuff, and that's definitely true. But also it's just like, I don't want someone to have the option to invalidate me, you know? Like, I'm a woman and I just want people to see me like that. So it's like, I don't want you to choose to gender me correctly. I just want you to just not even think about it. Like, oh yeah, that's a girl, totally. And I seem to be getting that. Like, I'm crazy tall, like I'm 6'5". So, you know, I think that will invite some scrutiny regardless, but yeah, I'm happy. Like, I'm settling into a life as myself that I'm like very, very happy with.
That's really, like, it's, I don't know. I'm sorry to cut you off. I just think that's really nice.
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah, I mean, I'm the person now who I was always supposed to be, and it took me a while to get here and figure it out, but like, yeah, I mean, I'm fucking gorgeous too. Like, oh my gosh. I can't tell you how often I catch myself in the mirror or whatever. Oh god, I'm gonna sound unhinged from this, but like, you know, I'll just, because I remember what I used to look like, and I remember that just constant pervasive sense of like the person in the mirror, even when I didn't know I was trans, even when I was like super hardcore in denial, there was always just that sense of like incongruity, like that it was just wrong. What I was seeing in the mirror was wrong, and I didn't know why. It was wrong in a way that I couldn't articulate really. So now I look in the mirror and I'm like, hey, good looking, hell yeah. And like, I'm super happy, and like I see my body and everything, and it's like wild how much hormones were good for me. And I'm just kind of like, yeah, I'm a babe, okay.
For anyone who hasn't seen a picture of Zoe, and if you're here from Reddit, you've already seen a picture of Zoe, because that's how we actually came to meet each other, because I commented on her post and said, hey, do you want to be on my podcast? Please don't think I'm a creep. So if you're here from there, you've probably seen her, but she is a babe. I can confirm this.
Yeah, you're pretty cute too. Is this the part of the podcast where we start hitting on each other?
No, we save that for after the show. There's like an after dark version of the show that we release later. For listeners, sorry, I can't speak anymore. I'm flustered. We don't do an after dark version of the show. That's just a joke, but
sorry to riz you on your podcast.
Moving. Sorry,
yeah.
I don't want to cut you off. But
Go ahead.
do want to move forward with another question, because I know you said you also wanted to talk about this as well, and I feel like you're going to have a lot to say, and I want to give you the time that you need to say it. So, you've talked a little bit about how you got started working in video games, but I was curious, like, how you broke into the industry and what was that like, and also too, if you have advice for other people, trans or not, queer or not, who might want to do the same thing, who want to break into the industry, especially in Montreal.
Yeah, so the number one piece of advice that I would give, and this is why I found a job, whereas a lot of my cohort who I studied with, who weren't even going into game dev, they were just going into development, you know, were unemployed for like a year after. You build a body of work while you're in school. Nobody gives a shit what your marks are. Like, get decent marks, you know, if you can make the honor roll, then that looks good. But also that's really hard and that's a lot of work. When you're in school, look at like programs, like research programs, or like, you know, campus organizations, like find clubs that are related to the thing that you want to make, games, I guess. I promise you, your university probably has a game dev club or something like that. If you can work on projects, whether it be mod teams or, you know, as a research assistant, if it's paid, that is even better. You know, in a perfect world, we wouldn't have to work for money, but like, you know, people are going to see that like, oh, you know, this fresh grad already has like a year, whatever of experience. Like they're not going to see that you were only working 10 hours a week. They're going to see, you know, a job from like, you know, for a year while you're in school. That's going to look really, really good. And, you know, get a portfolio, get a GitHub page. Like if you're a game developer, and, you know, you're on the programmer side of things, get your shit on GitHub and make sure that it's public. And so that like, if someone's considering you and they might want to look at you, like have a link to your GitHub, like put that below your phone number on your resume, like put that on below your phone number so that like, and make sure that the projects that are public on your GitHub are like, you know, solid ones. You don't need to make a huge, massive game that's super janky and busted. They're not going to play the whole thing. Make prototypes that are polished and look and sound kind of decent. That, you know, have like, you know, as professional as you're able to make it. Like, I know you're still a student, so like, or you're like, you know, still learning. Like, that's okay. You don't have to be perfect. Like, I talk about my capstone game. That was not perfect. That was janky as hell. It was a prototype I spun up in 12 weeks, but it was impressive enough to get me a job. So yeah, like, do whatever you can to build a body of work and make sure that that body of work is visible. Like when you are working for people, very explicitly be like, hey, can I use you as a professional reference on my resume? And they're going to say yes. People want to help students. People in games like being in games. Like I said, we don't do this because it's really convenient. We're all in this because we love it. So like, talk to people. Like, if you're trans, it's actually really great because as it turns out, I am not the only trans woman who is a game developer. There's at least 2 others. If you talk to trans people in games, you already kind of have an in. Like that's kind of a cool thing about being trans is that like you can talk to people that you might not have like an in for otherwise, who you have that in common and you can strike up a conversation. And if you're, you know, don't be weird about it, but like you can talk to them about being trans and about joining game dev. And like, you might very well have someone who's like a senior developer who, if you were, you know, you would not have had a way to talk to this person. This person wouldn't have even looked at your resume, but you met them on like Blue Sky or whatever. And, you know, you commented on their posts and you're both trans and like, you can start a conversation with that. Leverage that because like trans people like helping each other. Like there's a reason this is a community.
I mean, this podcast is a perfect example of that community bringing people together to do something game related.
Yeah. So like, yeah, I mean, I think I'm rambling at this point, but basically just like build a body of work, make sure that that body of work is visible and that it is as easy as possible. You know, people are not going to look at your resume as a hard copy. They're going to look at it as a document on their screen. So you have a link to your GitHub on your resume. When they click it, it's going to take them, like make sure it's a hyperlink that they can click on. I don't actually know how text editors work. I think they just do that automatically. I only know games. I'm like a moron with every other kind of technology. Yeah, and like network with people as much as you can, and leverage the fact that you're trans and that there's other trans people in game development. Don't sound. Try to make the interactions kind of naturalistic. Don't lie, but also don't just be like, "Hi, hello, fellow tran. Can I get a job, please?" Like that's not going to work. But like, if you kind of like have these natural conversations with people, you might, you know, maybe they'll be like, oh, you know, I know a studio that's looking for a junior, blah, 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 blah. My current job, actually, my best friend is a woman who is in cybersecurity. She's also trans. And I was at a cybersecurity conference with her in her industry, and she introduced me to one of her coworkers, and her coworker knew the HR guy at my current studio. And that ended up being the contact that got me my job. So yeah, like beyond that, it is really difficult. Like I'm not gonna lie to you. Like I've been very successful because I worked my ass off. Like I don't want to sound like, you know, some like bootstrap conservative or whatever, but like it is a shit ton of work to break into games. And I did it because I just like, I gunned for it for several straight years where it was all I did. And you're going to kind of need that, because my outcome was really positive and I love my career and everything now, but it is hard to get into. So like, there is absolutely nothing wrong with going into another type of development where maybe you can find more reliable employment and working on games in your free time. And then eventually maybe you come up with a project that looks good, or just you come up with prototypes and stuff that, you can add to your portfolio and then apply for games. You're probably going to make more money in other kinds of development, and probably not have to work as hard. I think I went on for like an hour and a half about that, but yeah, that's games. It's really fun and we love it, and also it's like kind of a nightmare right now.
Well, actually, that's my next question. So we've talked a little bit about this throughout the podcast, even in the news section, but so like with the risk of layoffs, queerphobia, misogyny, among other things, the games industry has become somewhat of a minefield recently, even for seasoned developers. And I'm wondering if you think it's still worth jumping into the industry during such a volatile time.
It's tricky. For me, working in games is like my destiny. That's what it feels like. There isn't actually anything else I could do. And if you feel that way, then yeah, do it. Otherwise, I would say that like, I'm coming at this from the programmer side of things. Something that is fun to play isn't necessarily something that is fun to work on, and vice versa. If you enjoy programming, there's a lot of things that you can do where you can build a skill set that is like adaptable to games. Like object-oriented programming as a theoretical discipline is agnostic to application. If you become a good programmer as a software developer, then you are going to be a good programmer as a game developer, outside of just like, there are some specific skills and programs that you need to learn, but it's like an adaptable skill set in the abstract. So I think that like right now, apply for game studios, totally. Like, absolutely do that. Have a version of your resume that is for game studios, but like, just don't accept any long-term contracts. Like in Montreal, there's this one company that, like, when I was out of school and I was like, it was my first summer here, and it's like, I need to get a job. I'm burning through my savings. And they made me an offer that I ended up refusing because it was like very low salary, and also you get locked into a 2-year contract. And their idea was that they basically poach a lot of students who are fresh out of school and they don't know any better. They lock them into these contracts, and then they, you will in a couple of years become a pretty good developer. And it's like, but then if you try to leave that job, the part of the contract is that you have to pay us $20,000 to break your contract. Don't accept anything like that that's going to lock you in. And then, go into other kinds of software development that you need to be able to pay your rent and buy food. Like, it's really important. Survive. Especially now, things are getting hard. If you can pivot into game dev, like, look for those opportunities, look for studios that are hiring, try to make contacts, hang out in like Discord servers where you can talk with other developers and, learn the craft a little bit. Don't shamelessly promote yourself, but just kind of like be open about like, I would like to work in games, and also I'm here because I'm working on a prototype. And asking for help with programming, programmers like showing off that they're good programmers. Like, it makes us feel cool. So when some newbie is looking for help with their thing, we want to help them for the most part. Some programmers are assholes, but for the most part, we do want to help people. And then that's how you start interactions and conversations. And if you're both queer, you've got like a thing to talk to them about. As far as getting into games right now goes, it's not impossible, but because of all the layoffs that have been happening in the industry lately, there is a lot of experienced talent on the market, and there is not enough jobs for all of them. So, if you're like new to the industry, if you're new to programming, if you're new, I always say programming stuff, but like, there are other jobs in the industry. There's lots of them. But like, you are competing with a very large talent pool for a diminishing number of positions. The games industry expanded during COVID because everyone was stuck inside and, we're just going to play games. And because capitalism is so great, they just thought that the good times were going to last forever. So all these companies expanded a lot, and now the industry is about to shrink, I think. I don't know that for sure, but that seems to be what's going to happen. So, I mean, look at games and see if you can find your in. It's like you're trying to jump onto a moving train or something, but ultimately find a career that will allow you to take care of yourself and also build an adjacent skill set so that you can pivot into games when you want to, or when it's more viable. And learn, like, pick up game dev as a bit of a hobby, because it's also just fun. Like, it's fun to make games. You don't have to make like super amazing AAA stuff. Like, there's all sorts of neat hobbyist projects. Like, I had never done any like really lower level programming. So I really wanted to learn like what homebrew was like. So I taught myself the C programming language, which, like, I use C#, which is like, baby tier. It's like so easy. It has its own garbage collection and everything. But then, I wanted to learn like, oh, what is it like to make a Game Boy Advance game? So I found a thing that allows you to write Game Boy Advance games in C, and then we'll compile them into playable GBA ROMs that I can then put on my little like emulation handheld devices. And I made Pong, and that was a very rewarding experience, because I'm used to using an engine that has all of these bells and whistles. Like, it handles like collision and rigid bodies and, rendering and all of this stuff. But now it's like, oh, I'm actually having to write this from scratch. And so I made Pong, and it was genuinely more difficult for me to learn that than make a much more complex game in an engine. So like, but it was fun. It was super rewarding. So like, if you're the kind of person that finds that fun, like, pick up those kinds of projects, and that'll just kind of keep your skill set sharp and keep you passionate. And like, you're not gonna make it in games unless you're really passionate about it. Like, you have to love it. You kind of have to. And if you don't love it, that's totally okay. Making games is not the same thing as playing games. You can love playing games, and maybe you don't enjoy the process of making them. Then, go into like cybersecurity or something is really cool. Like, be a professional hacker. That's badass. That's like what my bestie does, and she loves it. And she's probably going to be making more money than me when we're at similar stages in our careers.
So that's a good transition point, because my next question for you, and it's one of my last questions, and then we'll jump back to the one I wanted to ask you at the beginning. But I wanted to ask what your future career goals are.
Long term, I would like to have my own studio, I think, like a small team. I would actually really like to have like a kind of queer studio. This is a conversation that we can have that might be really interesting, which is like, I would like to have my own studio. I'd like to have like a studio that's like small, something where like a few people in this current day and age, with the kinds of tools and stuff that we have available to us, like a 5-person team can make a very ambitious game. If you're not going for like AAA polish, like there's a lot that a few people can do. So I would love to have I have a lot of ideas for games that like, I don't necessarily, and I think this was something we talked about before when it comes to representation. I want to see more trans representation, where it's like, I just want to see really cool game characters that are also trans, and like, them being trans isn't necessarily the focus of their identities. Like, it doesn't have to be a character drama about the misery of transition. For me, transition was a very positive thing. So it's like, I would love to see like we were talking, I keep bringing up Indiana Jones. Can you tell that I want to play that game really badly? Like an Indiana Jones type, like swashbuckling, globetrotting adventure character, and also they're trans, and like, it's not a secret. And we can work it into like the narrative and stuff. But also, it's not like a huge deal. Like, it's not the focus of them. I feel like, a lot of I want to be represented in games where this is just like an overall really cool, badass character that is also trans. And that's like a smaller part of like a whole person. I feel like a lot of the time when we do representation, it's like, there's nothing wrong with like being proud of being trans and liking who you are and stuff, but it's like, I don't have a lot of personal interest in a story that revolves entirely around that. I'd like that to be like a smaller part of like a whole person. And that's kind of the kind of thing that I would want to see. So if I were to ever make like a game, like making games about trans people, it's like, I think that I always want to make sure that the characters I would make in my own games would be trans. But it can also be incidental, and maybe that's not the focus of the game, or maybe it is the focus of a game. Like, I have some really cool narrative ideas for stuff that I would love to do with trans characters in games, where you can absolutely have them being trans be a huge part of the character in a way that could be like really like imagine if that was a twist. It's a twist in all sorts of transphobic media to reveal that like, oh, they used to be a man, but like, from a trans perspective, you could absolutely leverage that twist for all sorts of like cool dramatic irony, like plot twists and stuff. If like you reveal that the character you've been playing as is trans, and maybe that can recontextualize the narrative up to that point. There's a lot of interesting stuff that you could play with there, and it's like, that's stuff I'd like to explore. Yeah, because I mean, like, a lot of the trans representation I see is either that, like, I think my favorite trans game is like Celeste. And I don't think that like they ever really say that Madeline is trans in that game. It's just kind of like an incidental detail. But it's a very it the metaphor of Celeste like is the most blunt metaphor in the world, which is just you're climbing a mountain and that's really hard, and you can graft that onto a lot of different experiences. Like I think when I first played Celeste, I still thought I was a boy and I was very depressed, so I saw it as a game about like getting over your depression. And then I replayed it after I transitioned and I was like, oh, this is a game about like transitioning, but it works both ways. And like yeah, like it's really, really cool. Celeste is such a good game. Oh my god. Oh, it's a really good game. Everyone go play Celeste. I think it's on Game Pass. I don't know. I might be wrong.
I'll double check that.
But yeah, like that's probably one of the only like solid pieces of trans representation I've seen that I really like that is like by trans people. But also I don't think that the actual text of the game ever mentions that, which I think is okay. Like, I actually do think that the core message of Celeste works really well as ambiguous, because then it can be more helpful. Like Celeste is a very deeply meaningful game for a lot of the people who have played it. It gets very impactful. And so, I feel like by keeping it ambiguous what exactly Madeline is struggling with, you can broaden that impact, which has a lot of value. God, I love Celeste. Now I want to replay Celeste.
And it is on Game Pass, just to confirm for listeners and for yourself too.
Oh, such a good game. Yeah, I have it on Steam, I think. Anyways, yeah, so that's like a really good one. But then you get like, you remember, I think it was like Mass Effect Andromeda had a trans like side character NPC that was like the most awkward thing in the world, where it was like you run into this character and you don't know them. It's like a random NPC or whatever. And you're like, hi there, what's your story? And they're like, well, hello, I am a transgender. Here's my dead name and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, who the fuck talks like that? It was like weird. Like, that is like, oh, this is like a trans woman as written by like a 50-year-old cishet white guy,
Well, so I wanted to ask you too, because now we're talking about gay games, and trans games especially. It's a good segue, because I did want to ask my last question for you is, what is the gayest video game you've played? Is it Celeste or is it something else?
Probably Katamari Damacy. I know that there's no actual LGBT content in that game, but it's like, it's pretty gay. Like gay as a vibe. I haven't played that many games that have like I like seeing representation, but it's not necessarily like a huge motivator for me to go play stuff. I am very like, there's a lot of other stuff I look for. So it's one of those things that's like a nice to have. So I don't know if I've played that many gay games. God Hand is pretty gay. Also very homophobic, but like I still really like God Hand. It's like cartoony 90s homophobia that for some reason I find kind of endearing. Have you played God Hand?
No, I don't think I've heard of it until you mentioned it, actually.
It's a PS2, it's like a character action game. Well, it's like a beat 'em up. And it's very like silly and over the top, but the first world boss in God Hand is two very, very flamboyant gay men who are wearing like silver and gold respectively, like jock straps and like, assless chaps. And the entire time you're fighting them, they're like hitting on you. Like, they're like in like, they speak in like a super, super like stereotypical like gay accent. Like, oh my God, sweetie, we're gonna fight you. It's crazy homophobic. It's kind of really fun though. But like that whole game has like, I don't know, gay as a vibe. It's like very colorful and silly and over the top in a way that's like really exciting. I wish I had a better answer for this, because I haven't played very many games that I would say like that really like stand out to me as being very gay. I mean, I always play as a lesbian in RPGs. I think like BioWare's stuff is usually really good for that. I really wanted to play Mass Effect Dragon Age Veilguard. I know what games are, I promise. I really wanted to play that, but it's like $100, so I didn't. But then I saw Inquisition was on Game Pass, and I started that, and that was really fun. I'm still early on in that. I start so many games. I'm bad at finishing games.
I have the same problem, don't worry.
This is why I play so many retro games, is because it's like, oh, I can beat Castlevania 1 in an afternoon,
I mean, we've been talking about shorter games, and I think shorter game experiences would be nice, especially like indie games are great for that. And I'm not like trying to undermine what indie games stand for and like just playing indie games in general. I think people should go play them and support them whenever they can.
All of the best games that are coming out these days are indie games. 100%. Like, the new Indiana Jones game, I swear I'll stop bringing that up after this time. That looks amazing, and it's like, the reason that looks so amazing is because it looks like the kind of game that can't exist anymore. All of, like, in the AAA space. Like, a focused, polished, single player, like, this isn't trying to take over your life with live service stuff. It's just, here's a really great, like, 20 hours.
Yeah, that's exactly what I want for more AAA games. Like, if you're going to put the money in to make it look as polished and as nice as it is, like, make it shorter. Make it bite-sized. I had a coworker actually ask me, and I kind of laughed when he asked because I was like, that doesn't exist. But he asked for a snackable AAA game, and I was like, those two words don't go together. You don't get a snackable game that's also AAA. And he even said afterwards, he's like, I'm sure that like sounds ridiculous, and I'm like, it does, but it shouldn't.
No, it's really funny too because like we were talking about the EA guy, that it's a selling point for your game to be hundreds of hours long, but also like, the games have analytics and like you can see how many people get certain achievements. Like 90% of players never finish your game. Like, so why does it need to be 100 hours long? Most of your players are only going to get 10 hours in.
Yeah, if you look on any PlayStation trophy list, and if there's like, for each level of the game, there's a trophy when you get to like at the end of Final Fantasy, for example, in Remake, when you get to the end of a chapter, you'll see like 90% of people got the trophy for chapter 1, 80% for chapter 2, 60% for chapter 3. It keeps going down and down until like the completion trophy, not even the platinum, but just the completing the story is like,
and it's like 2% or something.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, like people don't finish games, so it's like, yeah, and like you're gonna make a better game. Like there's this isn't like a formal industry term. This is just something I refer to as the distribution of polish, which is like you have so many development resources, you have people on your team, you have money, you have budget, and you have time. And the more focused your game is, like whatever resources you have, the smaller and more focused your game is, the more polished it's going to be. If you're making your big, AAA open world extravaganza, like that's invariably going to be less polished than if the same team were making something half as big. And like I like polish. I like cool, interesting. Like one of my favorite series of all time is Metal Gear Solid, and like Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3 especially have like so many like crazy details that it's like how did they, why did they, like it's really cool, but also why, like the ice cubes in Metal Gear Solid 2, like they'll melt on the counter, but also if you shoot them to split them up, the smaller ice cube will melt faster. Somebody programmed ice cube melting into the game, and it's cool as hell to see. And it's like, if you have like a really small focused game, you have so much more room to really polish it like that. Because, Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3 are like, I love those games. The first 3 Metal Gear Solid games I love more than some family members. I really like those games. I'm just kidding, family. If you're listening, I love you all 5% more than Metal Gear Solid.
Well, we're talking too about another recent game I can mention on top of Indiana Jones that's like focused, short, and polished is Astrobot's like a 10 to 15 hour game, the new one on PS5, not the tech demo, but like the full.
I've heard it's great.
It's amazing. It's polished, and it's like it's doing exactly what it's set out to do. And because it's so focused that they can even focus on like these little details, like you're talking about like ice cubes and stuff like that. Like you can like and like there's just so many things you do with the DualSense that just add like that little bit of extra like charm to it. And like games are so big and bloated that like no one's focusing on those like little details anymore, like the ice cubes.
I'm talking about Metal Gear Solid 1 through 3 because then as a point of comparison, there's Metal Gear Solid 5, which I'm gonna get crucified for this. I don't like Metal Gear Solid 5. I don't think it's a very good game. But it is like, because it is like a big, bland open world extravaganza where it's like, it doesn't have that that level of like details and polish. Like I can't remember finding a lot of things in that game that made me think, wow, that's neat. Whereas I can think of so many things in the previous Metal Gear Solid games where I'm like, wow, that's neat, because it's like the scope of the game is so much bigger. Like, you know, the bigger you make your display, the bigger the pixels are, or whatever. I don't know. That's a terrible metaphor. You know what I mean, though?
No, but I've read stories and then this interview with the PlayStation executive, with Sean Layden. You should go read it, because he does talk about like 4K, for example. Like these game development budgets are bloating too, not just because people are expanding their scope, but also because like Nintendo had like historically Nintendo had big trouble jumping to HD, and it's why they avoided it for the Wii, because it just like bloated everything. And Satoru Iwata said, I think back in the late 90s, is like, this is going to go really poorly for Nintendo, for everyone one day. He saw it 20 years ago. And then you've got the Switch, which is pumping out 13 games a year. You've got a new game every month almost. And Nintendo is putting out these AA games and making the budgets look bigger than they are and all these other things. And it's just because they've like reined in their scope. They understand that like 4K assets are just way too costly. And I think Nintendo is going to have some trouble coming up. Because it's been rumored that, well, first off, the new Switch is probably going to be 4K. But also, there was a leak recently, and I tend to believe it because it sounds just ridiculous enough to be true, is that Nintendo's trying to find more third-party studios to develop first-party exclusives for them, because they're going to run into the problem where the games they're making are too bloated, or they're taking longer to make, at least. Maybe not bloated. They'll probably still be honed in scope. But they're going to need more games to put out, because they're going to have the gaps that PlayStation and Sony, I say PlayStation and Sony, that PlayStation and Xbox are having now, where like, yeah, they have a bunch of AAA games, but it's like 2 or 3 a year. And then, you know, sparsed out with maybe a couple remakes, but like Sony's not putting out 13 games a year because they can't.
Yeah. And like, I would much rather play any of those Nintendo games than like, okay, I mean, to be fair, the Sony first-party exclusives do tend to be really good, but still, like, Nintendo is crushing it from a game design standpoint. Like, they make really good games. Like, God, Nintendo games are good. And it's like, I would be perfectly okay if graphics never got better.
Me too.
Then even like 10 years ago, if 10 years ago we just stopped improving graphics, that would have been absolutely okay. Alien Isolation came out 10 years ago. That game still looks better than most of the shit that's coming out now.
Mario Odyssey as well. Like I wouldn't need Astrobot to look better than that from a graphics perspective if it had the DualSense. I call them gimmicks, but in a good way. So
there's so much more that you can do. And like I played Luigi's Mansion 3 kind of recently, and it's like, that game looks phenomenal.
It does.
It looks
so good.
Really,
and it plays so well, and it's so contained and well designed, and it's just.
And there's so much detail in the environments. Like when you're like, that is one of my favorite games for the subgenre of just messing around with stuff. Like there's so many like physics objects and particle effects and everything in all of the environments that just like, you know, you have a ghost fight and it's like, it looks like a John Woo shootout just happened, and it's sick.
And it's Canadian made too. I know Nintendo. Was in charge of development, but I'm pretty sure, I think they're called Next Level Games in Vancouver. Nintendo just bought them up, but they've been developing the last 2 Luigi's Mansion games.
Hell yeah, okay. Yeah, like it's, yeah, I mean, there's like the cynical, my cynicism is like the direction that the industry is going to go is probably not going to be something that I'm happy with. I mean, you know, so AAA is unsustainable. Like, great. I'm glad everyone is starting to agree with that. So I think that there's going to be some really hard times as the major companies like pivot towards like trying to find their new model. There's like that teensy hope of optimism I have, which is like, hey, what if you do the A24 thing where you fund a lot of smaller projects with those budgets? And then you only need like a couple of them to be really successful, and that pays for the rest of them. Like, I would love to see an industry where they realize that that's the play, because I think that that would be really good for business, because I don't think that consoles are going to be able to compete with mobile. Mobile is always going to be bigger for that kind of thing. People have their phones in their hands. The free-to-play model has been completely standard on mobile for like 20 years now. Not 20 years, I'm making things up, but like a good while. Like you're not gonna turn console games into mobile games because people already have phones. You're not gonna get someone to buy your $500 box for you to nickel and dime them like that. But people would buy polished single player games that spread by word of mouth that are like $25, like the cost of like your average indie game nowadays. And if you fund lots of those, then every once in a while you're going to have like a Stardew Valley or an Undertale that sells a shit zillion copies. And then, you know, you can like spin those off into like proper franchises. Like, I don't know. I'm not a business person. Maybe I'm being naive, but like that's an industry I would like to see. Like that's the optimistic outcome I would love to see from this current situation. I don't think that's what's going to happen because I'm cynical and it's capitalism. But like, you know,
that's fair. Well, you talked about phones, and I think we've been talking for long enough. I don't want to keep you much longer, but I do want to ask where people can find you on social media.
Oh, I'm Zoe Elite on Blue Sky. Actually, let me go to my computer and make sure I remember my Blue Sky. I'm trying to use Blue Sky because it actually seems like people are doing stuff on it. Yeah, I'm Zoe Elite, so ZoeLeet on there, and I'm trying to post more. I'm also Brain Warts on Reddit, which is where we met. Yeah, I'm not that active on social media. The rest of my socials are like people I have like as family and friends. I'm Zoe.Leet on Instagram. And then if you're interested in our game, it is really cool. Like I haven't actually talked at all about like the game we're making, but it's coming out in January. I think our release date is the 14th or the 15th. This is going to be my first big launch of my career, which I'm really excited for. We're making a Loft, which is like a survival game. It's set in like an archipelago of islands in the sky. And I'm very cynical about survival crafting games generally. So like when I heard about it, I wasn't that excited. And then I got on the team and I was like, oh, we're actually making something really amazing. The level of polish, it's a beautiful game. It's incredibly well designed. We're really hitting above our belt as far as presentation goes. Like I think that we're making something that's really incredible for a team of 20 people. So yeah, you can follow.
Remind me what the title of the game is.
Aloft, like ALOFT, and yeah, we're Astrolabe Interactive. Yeah, and like our entire team is in. Like I actually like I'm in Montreal. McGill is the big university here. I actually went to a thing on Thursday night where our sound engineer, or our audio guy, he does like the sound and music. I don't know what his exact job title is, but he's brilliant. He does like the sound design in our game is absolutely incredible. And I went to like him presenting like a demo of our game to like this private event, like private after hours event in a lecture hall where people from the Montreal games industry were presenting like their sound design. And it was like all of the games that people showed were really, really cool. But it was like, you know, oh my God, our game has crazy good sound. Yeah, like you ever like, you know, when Breath of the Wild came out, like Breath of the Wild has amazing sound. I would like,
it really does.
Well, I would like when I was doing other stuff, I would just like park Link in like a forest or something that had lots of ambient sound and just turn my volume up and leave it idle because that game's soundscape is so soothing. And like our game kind of sounds like that. It's crazy atmospheric. All of our art is really beautiful. Yeah, I'm just gushing. I'm excited about our game because like it's the first time in my career I'm working on something that I actually can't wait to play myself, you know?
Well, you've sold it for me. I don't like survival crafting games either, but like from what you said, like the other elements sound so good. I'm putting this on my wish list and I'm really excited for it to release now. So
yeah, I have no idea what the key situation is, but if they're very liberal about giving us keys for friends and family, maybe I could give you one. I can't promise that though. I have no idea.
No, but if I can though, I'd like to support the developers.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, no, just pay me directly. It's fine. But yeah, it's really cool, and it's really cool to be a part of. Like everyone on our team is incredibly like creative. Like our artists are brilliant, our sound guy's brilliant. You know, I don't want to like. I feel like I'm going to leave people out, but just like everyone is so good at what they do. Like we're really punching above our belt, and it's like it feels so good. Like I'm new to the team, and like it feels so good to be in this situation where I'm just surrounded by really passionate, creative people. It's like it's a dream come true. It's what I always wanted.
I want to see more happy people, happy trans people, happy queer people in their element, in their industries, whether they're creative or they work in wherever they work. Even if you work for corporations, if you're happy there, I like to see you thriving. So
yeah, me too. A lot of the discussion about like trans people and transitioning is like, you know, focused on a lot of the negativity, which of course there's good reasons for that. Like there's some news happening. But I mean, like, I don't want people who are afraid to transition to think that like, oh, if I transition, it's just like my life is going to be terrible and I'm going to be like this nightmare outcast. Like there's going to be hurdles for you to get over, but like, I don't think that you're going to be happy in the closet. You know, you deserve to be yourself. And like, I want people to see that like, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. I'm incredibly happy now. My life is great. And like, and it's not just me. Like I am in Montreal and I have built a huge, like, you know, circle of trans friends who are also thriving in various things. Like one of my best friends, you know, my best friend is in cybersecurity. I have friends who are in like, you know, that are film editors, that are, you know, developers of various sorts, that are in all kinds of different fields. Like you can do good. Like the life can be good. And let's hope that, you know, you're going to have to kind of like,
I mean, transitioning won't solve all your problems, but it'll solve a few of them and then make the other ones 10 times easier to solve.
Yeah, I like, you know, I talked about having been very depressed before I transitioned. And like, I think I did have like a long period where after I transitioned, I had been kind of flattening reality and just pretending like, oh, this solved all of my problems. My mental health is completely fine now. I was full of shit. That was not true. But it's like, you know, I was so miserable before that just the amount better that I was felt like this is as good as it gets. And I was like becoming really happy, but I still had like kind of an unstable mood. But then I think recently I started being a lot more honest with myself where I'm like, okay, things aren't perfect. Like you know, I have obviously like emotional issues. And so I actually like just recently, like a couple months ago, I started taking antidepressants, which have been transformative because now it's like, you know, I've been happy for a few years, but also like, you know, with like caveats. And now I'm looking back and I'm like, oh, now I'm like actually happy and things just keep getting better. And I'm just like, I believe it now, you know? I think when you've been miserable for a long time, you don't trust happiness. Like you're like, oh, this is a trick, you know? Like the world is tricking me. I can't be happy. No. It takes a while for you to actually realize like, oh no, things are good, you know?
Yeah. And
that's what I've been really settling into since I moved here, where it's like, you know, I went to that cool thing at like the university with like games industry sound engineers. I'm on a podcast. I work at a cool studio. I have lots of great friends. I love what I do a lot. I'm making a game in my spare time that like, I'll see if it goes anywhere, but even if it doesn't, it's fun to work on. It's like life is super good right now. I want people who are like, you know, who are trans and like considering transitioning to see like trans joy that like it can be good, like better than good. Like, it could be great. And, you know, like I'm a woman and I was so afraid before I transitioned of like, am I actually going to have the life of a woman? You know, like, are people going to see me and respect me as such? Or, you know, am I just going to constantly have this imposter syndrome related to being trans? And it's like, I don't have any imposter syndrome. I don't think that people know that I'm trans unless I tell them. And I'm not ashamed of it. So I'm not afraid to tell them. But also like when I walk down the street, it's like, I know they're not seeing a guy in a dress. They're seeing like an insanely tall, hot chick.
So on that note, I'll just clarify too. So you mentioned Instagram, you mentioned Reddit, and you mentioned Blue Sky.
Yeah.
Is there anywhere else people can find you? And can you just repeat the social handles?
Yeah. So Reddit is Brainwarts. Which is, I mean, I post a lot on like the SBC, like retro game subreddits, and also like I post selfies sometimes. Like sometimes I'm like, I want attention today, so I'll post some selfies on like a queer subreddit, which, you know, I am willing to admit that sometimes I just want some shameless validation.
Who doesn't?
And then on Instagram, I also post like a lot of selfies. My Instagram's kind of like a transition timeline, I guess. Instagram, I mainly like, what I actually use is like a DM with my friends on there, like all of my friends who aren't on Discord. And then Blue Sky is, please interact with me on Blue Sky, because it seems like a really cool platform. You know, it's something that I want to start using more because I like it, and I'm hoping that it becomes like a good ecosystem. Yeah, because Twitter became super great. Oh no, I'm dead naming Twitter. Whoops.
That's okay. When Elon Musk stops dead naming his daughter and treating her like shit, we can start calling Twitter X.
Yeah. I'm just gonna keep calling it Twitter. Fuck that guy. But yeah.
Well,
Right, I was saying my
yes.
handles, it's Zoe Leet, Zoeleet. For Instagram, it's zoe.leet. Because I picked that handle before I actually was like Leet, and now I am Leet, so I did it. The only reason I'm doing good at my career is so that I can justify my Twitter handle.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been really great having you.
Yeah, my pleasure. This was a lot of fun.
So that just about wraps up this week's show. Thanks for joining me for another episode of True Avatars, a queer video game podcast. If you've made it this far into the episode, I really appreciate you taking the time to support queer-made content, which is a big deal. It's been really fun working to bring this podcast to you. I always do my best to bring queer voices on every week to discuss what's relevant in video games. I hope you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at WildZoeAppears. I also have a YouTube channel, Wild Zoe Appeared, which is currently kind of dead since I haven't posted in a year and a half. I'm trying to rebuild my social media presence, and this podcast is just the start. And actually, I did manage to grab handles this week for Blue Sky, for Instagram, for Twitter. So you can find me at True Avatars. I know Blue Sky, you add the .bsky.social or whatever. I'm hoping to get rid of that eventually because I think it's a bit silly, but you can find True Avatars there as well if you want to follow. It's seriously, I haven't posted anything. I literally just got the handles. Importantly, if you or anyone you know, we talked about this earlier, if you or anyone you know is queer and involved with video games in some way, please do not hesitate to reach out. You can email me at trueavatars.podcast@gmail.com. That's the most professional, clear way to do it. Obviously, social media works out too. So if you want to message me there too, that's totally cool. But please don't hesitate to reach out. I would really, really love to hear from more queer voices in video games. Your voice is unique and valid and worth sharing with the world. And I truly do mean that. I don't just say this every week as like a way to close the show. I mean that. And if you don't want to be on the show or you don't know anyone who's interested, but maybe you know about a cool queer video game or a games industry story that's queer related, please let me know. I would really like to platform more queer games on the show, especially queer indie games. Things are tough out there and queer people need to stick together when we can. But that's all for today. Bye, True Avatars. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to speaking with you all again next week. Take care and stay safe.